One of the devastating tragedies of U.S. history is the assassination of Martin Luther King. With his tragic death, there were mass amounts of various displays of outrage and grief that were displayed in a variety of different communities across the country. Every area of the country was touched, including my hometown of Pine Bluff during that time period. Listen as Uncle Ray shares his experience in terms of where he was when this tragic day occurred.
So I got two more questions for you. Call where you were when Martin Luther King was assassinated.
I was in Washington, D.C., visiting my big brother, Dr. J.R. Owens. As a matter of fact, it was me and this white boy. We had driven from Connecticut to D.C., and we always drive. He was like an alcoholic, and he just drove. But we couldn't get back. We couldn't get out because when Martin Luther King died, the city started rioting, and I was on the northeast side, and where my brother was, and I couldn't get out because the army had come in and taken over because they were looting and destroying property and so forth. And so we tried to get out, and so me and my buddy, I finally got up with him, and we drove out in the dark of night to avoid the army. Yeah, I remember that real good.
One of the hallmarks about having living history, meaning people who are still alive who can share with you the experiences, is they also have the wisdom and the experience to share with you the lessons that they learn from a time period that probably a large majority of the population cannot even relate to. Take a listen as Uncle Ray shares with us and with me some lessons that he would want future generations to take from the experiences that he underwent.
I can share this with you. It may not answer the question, but it's how I'm sensing it. Okay. If I could convey to this generation the positives of my generation, would be the absolute beauty of our culture during those 60s and 50s. I would convey that culture, that oneness that we had, that not just sense of oneness with each other, but with God. It made no difference whether or not, especially if you're a kid. Now, if you're a child or a young man, okay, everybody was your teacher in your neighborhood. The drunks, you couldn't despise a drunk because the drunk would respect you. He would respect your mama. He'd respect God. And very rarely you find the women drunk, but you find those men, they would respect you. They knew you. Everybody knew everybody, you know what I mean? But that culture was a culture of, how do we say it now that we got a little bit of Africanism back in? It takes a village to raise a child. That's what happened then. A village raised you up. Okay, we understood quite clearly that the enemy was the white man. It wasn't the white man, it was us. It was the barrier was the white man and his culture. But we always had that culture that promoted excellence in school, excellence in education, excellence in conduct, excellence in speech, excellence in dress, excellence in your people. It was always that culture. Everybody did it. Everybody knew that the only way out was to educate your behind out, including you are the product of that.
There's an old phrase that's often used, it takes a village to raise a child. And during the 50s and the 60s, that phrase had an even greater significance, especially in light of the various dangers that children of color faced, and definitely in the deep South and in the Jim Crow South during this time period. a lot of that philosophy carried through towards the integrated society in terms of future generations. And this was one that was imparted, and I can say was passed on to me. So listen in as I share my perspective as well as my uncle's response to this realization that I was a product of the village to raise a child philosophy of my community.
When I interviewed my mom, I told her, I don't think I should have talked about it in the interview. I talked to her about this offline, about how I said when I grew up in Pine Bluff, hated going to school. Because even though I liked the schoolwork, but I hated the fact that every grade, somebody knew somebody from my family. I mean, I couldn't get away from that. It was like every grade. And because my last name was Reeves, it would throw people off, but they would just look at my face and say, yeah, I know your people are around here. And so by process of elimination, they would be like, you Ray's nephew, you Jay Jr.'s nephew, who's your people? And then finally they would figure out Glenda, and they're like, okay. And my mom was nice enough to tell me that I was, in her words, she said, your generation and your friends because all my friends were in the same category, because all of our parents grew up in Pine Bluff, so we all had the same problem. And she said our generation was probably the last generation to truly benefit from that village mentality in terms of, there was no escaping somebody who knew your people, who was going to make sure that it was a nice, friendly reminder. And I mean, Uncle Ray, at the beginning of every school year, at some point a teacher would say, who's your grandparents? Who's your mom? Who's your dad? You look like such, somebody would look at me and say, you look like Ronnie Owens. You related to him? I'm like, oh, that's my uncle. Oh, okay. All right. So, and so they would set the tone for the year to let us know, yes, I know your family. They never have to say, I know your family, so act right. It would be, as soon as they told you who it was they knew, you knew they had an outlet to somebody. So if you clowned, guess who? You weren't going to get away too far from it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, I read a book maybe about 22 years ago, and the book was called Children of the Dream. And that's exactly what you are. Okay, you're a child of the dream. And the dream, of course, is Martin Luther King's dream. But Martin Luther King's dream came from, just from him being African American. So, yeah, that's a good thing, that you were raised by a village.
Taking a moment to talk about the impact of family is a serious issue with regards to Uncle Ray, because if you listen carefully to his points, he's letting you know how much the young people played an integral part in the survival and the progression of civil rights during these time periods, and how much family played a role in supporting each other in their endeavors.
Well, don't forget now, behind him going there is his friends going, and of course our parents want to make sure that we are safe, and so they wouldn't allow us to go, but we being boys, boys will be boys, and we don't want to be left out. So I'm sure that's how Jay had felt. He didn't want to be left out of this opportunity to be a part of something big, Me, I just want to see what's going on, because I knew my brother would say to me, no, you can't go. And, of course, me and Louis Jr., we went everywhere, and we just went on and watched behind the line, because we couldn't take the spitting and stuff like that. But yeah, but that was another side. The other side, don't forget, the other side was taking care of your family. There was a layer of power, a border that you had to respect, or you had to tear down or overcome, and that is the aborter of authority. Very rarely would you have anybody African American that was in charge, but you had white folks in charge, and the level of income, the level of money, the level of authority, that's still army-like, and during those times. And so you could lose your job, you could lose your welfare, taking care of your family, and so a lot of people shut up and be quiet. That's why children led the way, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's why children led the way. They had nothing to lose except for, and nobody was going to hurt a child or kill a child until, of course, they threw the bomb in the church. That's where you want to hurt us. You can hurt us in the church. You want to kill all black folk? Wait, church style. You can. Used to be anyway.
I want to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to tune in to my Living with Jim Crow series and the final part of my series with my Uncle Ray, Ray's Way, as he shared his experiences growing up in the rural Jim Crow South during the 1950s and the 1960s. My name is Reeves, everyone, and as always, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy, and I want you to look forward to future podcasts here on In the Know with Tony Reeves.